the issues affecting Asia's animals and the stories of the people working on their behalf. We'll be taking you on a tour of what's been happening lately in the animal protection space around Asia and also bringing you updates from our huge network of animal protection organizations and our many working groups. Welcome to the Asia for Animals podcast.
Hello and welcome to another podcast episode from Asia for Animals Coalitions. I'm Ngọc Anh Nguyen, lead coordinator of the policy coalitions at AFA. In today's episodes, we delve into the crucial developments and milestones leading up to the pandemic treaty in 2024, a pivotal moment in our global health landscape. Join us as we explore the intricate layers of this landmark treaty and its implications for the future of pandemic preventions. Joining us today are two distinguished guests from Four Paws International, a leading organization in animal welfare advocacy. First, we welcome Nina Jamal. Nina is the International Head of Pandemics and Campaign Strategies at Four Paws International. Before taking on that role and since 2013, Nina led the international campaigns on farm animals and nutrition campaigns at Four Paws. Nina has also worked in the climate movement on campaigns and international policy within the UN Framework Conventions on Climate Change negotiations, as well as in the private sector on sustainability and UNIDO on the implementations of international multilateral environmental agreements. Her background is in environmental health sciences, public health, and international environmental policies. Alongside Nina, we have Teresa Pecker-Ball. Teresa studied international economics and has a master's degree in human-animal interactions from the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna, Austria. She started working for Four Paws International in 2016 and has managed the project Pandemics and Animal Welfare together with Nina since the beginnings of the COVID-19 pandemic. Together with a broad network of multidisciplinary experts and NGOs worldwide, the team strives for a pandemic treaty which improves animal welfare, thus saving humans and animals' lives via a One Health approach. Nina and Teresa, welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Gökhan. Hi.
Hi, thanks for inviting us. It's a pleasure being part of this podcast.
Nina, given your extensive background, could you shed light on when the concepts of the pandemic treaty first emerged in global discussions and what factors led to its conceptions? Additionally, we're eager to understand the envisions, purpose, and significance of these international instruments in the context of the pandemic. Finally, what potential impact do you foresee this treaty having in enhancing global health resilience?
Thank you, Gökhan. This question takes us down memory lane. It's been almost 4 years since the pandemic has begun and a lot has changed. So in terms of the driving factors, what led to the creation of the pandemic treaty? It was that leaders realized that we were not at all prepared for a global pandemic, for the loss of life, the economic consequences. It was a crisis that was big enough to trigger a global response. No one wanted to go through such a pandemic again. And then the first calls for collaboration to tackle pandemics that we noticed were at the November 2020 Paris Peace Forum, where EU Council President Charles Michel said that we need to learn from the pandemic, that there's a need to act more quickly in a more coordinated way to make medical equipment available, to exchange information. So that was the first signal we noticed. And then at the same time, during that Paris Forum, Peace Forum, the tripartite, so the FAO, World Organization for Animal Health, WHO, plus UNEP, the tripartite plus UNEP, met and agreed to further enhance their cross-sectoral collaboration by creating the One Health high-level expert panel. So that's when we started seeing first signals. But that was not the first time that governments were talking about creating a treaty. The first time they started to talk about the treaty was at the G7 leaders meeting in February 2021, almost a year after, or actually around a year after, the WHO announced a global public health emergency of international concern. And that's where EU leaders stated their commitment to work on advancing global health security, on strengthening the WHO, on working towards an international treaty on pandemics. And then a few weeks later, several high-level government representatives, so we're talking here prime ministers, presidents, including, of course, the EU, but notably also governments from other continents. So we had Chile, Costa Rica, Fiji, Indonesia, Kenya, Korea, Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, Thailand, Trinidad and Tobago, Tunisia, many countries, as well as the UK, of course, many countries, they published this opinion editorial calling for a treaty rooted in the WHO constitution that fosters a whole of government, whole of society approach. But their initial focus was on preparedness, preparing for the next pandemic, not preventing it. So obviously here we as civil society organizations were concerned. And then a few months later at the World Health Assembly in May 2021, we started noticing a more formalized announcement. Governments called for a special session that May and during the World Health Assembly for that special session to happen in November 2021 to talk about developing an international instrument on preparedness and response. So it was at the beginning about preparing, and then it was about preparing and responding, but not yet about preventing. And by November 2021, experts, civil society, and member states were aligned that preparing and responding to a next pandemic will not be enough to ensure global health security. So when member states agreed to develop a new treaty that November 2021, they added prevention to the scope, making it a treaty to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And that was a scope that is sufficient to enhance global health security. So that's what you were also asking about. You asked about the impact of the treaty on enhancing global health resilience. And global health resilience within the treaty, if we want to make sure that the treaty ensures global health resilience, it will depend on three things. One of them is the level of ambition on prevention through a One Health approach, because prevention through a One Health approach means we will tackle the root causes of outbreaks and prevent them at source before they happen. So that's one thing. The second thing we need to see is a focus on equity, and not just vaccine equity or equity in the phases of preparing and responding to pandemics, but also in preventing outbreaks through a One Health approach. And what we mean here is protecting vulnerable communities before an outbreak, because it is the best way to achieve equity for them before they suffer. The third thing we need to see to enhance global health resilience is investing in health for all, humans, animals, and the environment, and supporting governments in implementing the steps that are needed to prevent pandemics and increase global health resilience. So financing capacity building, technical support. So if we want the treaty to achieve those objectives, we need to focus on these 3 points. Back to you, Gökhan.
Thank you, Nina, for your insightful introductions. Teresa, it is estimated that approximately 75% of emerging infectious disease are zoonotic in nature. Could you explain what zoonotic pathogens are and how they bridge the gaps between animals and humans in the spread of the disease, particularly focusing on risks associated with factory farming, wildlife handling, and trade?
Yes, you're completely correct. A large percentage of new and also existing infectious diseases are zoonoses. Zoonotic pathogens pass from animals to humans. They can either be bacterial, viral, or parasitic, and they can be transmitted through direct contact, but also through food, water, or the environment. So zoonoses are diseases which originate in animals and can be transmitted to humans. Pathogens can spread within, but also between species. They mutate in some cases, evolve, gain new characteristics, and can infect humans. Human-driven practices such as habitat destruction, biodiversity loss, factory farming, land use change, wildlife trade, live animal markets, all those practices pose a major health risk because they bring humans in contact with pathogens they are probably not yet familiar with, and thus facilitate spillover events. But what's important to mention here is that animals themselves are not the problem, are not the main cause of pathogen transmission. It's rather humans and human behavior which impacts the environment and animal health and welfare. So to just mention a few examples of zoonosis, these are HIV, SARS, BSE, bird flu, Ebola, rabies, COVID-19. And as we could see with COVID-19, they have the potential to cause global pandemics.
Teresa, considering the intricate connections between humans, animals, and ecosystems, what strategies or policies do you believe can be implemented to prevent emerging zoonotic disease, considering the impacts of and risks posed by factory farming and wildlife trade, while respecting the vital roles that animals play in our environment and society?
Yeah, thank you. Here it's important to mention the role of prevention, as Nina already pointed out. So preventing the emergence of zoonotic diseases means addressing the root causes and drivers of zoonosis, which is in contrast to preparedness, containment, and response measures, which take effect after a disease outbreak, with the aim to just contain and limit the spread of disease. Preventing disease outbreaks instead, and also spillover events from happening, is the most efficient and also cost-effective approach to addressing pandemics. Such root causes include, among others, the increasing demand for animal proteins, the unsustainable intensification of agriculture, the increasing use and exploitation of wildlife, which are all linked to habitat encroachment and destruction and biodiversity loss. In general, settings in which a huge proportion of animals are raised, traded, kept, transported, slaughtered, in cramped and also overcrowded environments with poor hygiene, different species being mixed together, and conditions which suppress immune systems, all those conditions create an ideal situation for the emergence, mutations, and spillover of pathogens. In order to prevent zoonotic outbreaks, we need to improve animal health and welfare, and we also need to reduce the contact between humans and livestock's contact to wildlife. So if we have a look at factory farming, we need to improve the health and welfare of farm animals to protect also humans and nature. We need to reduce livestock numbers and stock density. We need to transition to more sustainable, more healthy, and more plant-based food systems. We need to implement and also enforce policies conserving ecosystems and biodiversity. We need to shift away from intensive agriculture, which drives deforestation, land use change, and environmental degradation, and so threatens the health of humans, animals, and nature. When we look at wildlife trade, and also live animal markets, you said before that 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are zoonosis. Which is really a horrific number. And of these 75%, 70% come from wildlife. So it's crucial to not only tackle the illegal, but also the legal trade of wildlife in order to prevent future pandemics. So just to mention a few facts and figures, according to scientific findings, there are around 1.7 million undiscovered viruses in mammals and birds, of which more than 800,000 could infect humans. So that's really astonishing. The pandemic treaty needs to include a precautionary principle to address this health risk. Countries need to commit not to trade in or market any wild animals without first assessing the risks of such trade to animal and human health. We should talk about ending the commercial trade of wild animals, starting with certain high-risk species and banning high-risk wildlife activities. Important to mention here is that commercial trades means that it does not interfere with indigenous people's rights to subsistence food.
Thank you, Teresa, for your very detailed explanations for both questions. I'd like to dedicate the next questions to Nina. Nina, to gain a deeper understanding of the current situations, could you provide us with insights into the current state of play in the negotiations of the pandemic treaty? What are some of the key hurdles that civil society organizations are actively working to overcome? Additionally, in your opinion, once enacted, how does the agreement plan to involve civil society organizations in pandemic prevention and response efforts?
Thank you, Gökhan. This is a very good question, and I'm very glad you asked. So, on the current state of the negotiations, and if we remember what Teresa just said about how high the risks are and how urgent it is to tackle risks on the human-animal environment interface, what we're noticing is slow progress and a gap between what science says and what negotiators are putting in the legal text. The reason is because developing countries have suffered immensely from the pandemic. So their ministries of health who are leading on the negotiations together with the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, are instructing the negotiators to secure support for preparedness and vaccines, not for prevention. And at the moment, One Health and prevention are viewed as priorities of developed countries in the negotiation. So they're being used, so One Health and prevention are being used as negotiation chips in return for progress on articles linked to vaccines, access and benefits in relation to sharing pathogen data, etc. So in brief, the negotiations are very slow, if not stagnant, because governments are saying nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So if no progress happens on one front, there will not be progress on the other. And now, as for CSO participation, and Four Paws and I'm sure also Asia for Animals members, we've been part of several international negotiations, and it's safe to say that the CSO participation at the WHO process is quite limited compared to other UN processes. The opportunities that we have for engagement within the WHO Treaty on Pandemics are that NGOs can be nominated to become Annex E or relevant stakeholders within the process. Member states have to nominate these organizations. And in the past sessions, so all the intergovernmental negotiating body sessions until the summer, we were able to log on virtually for the opening and closing plenaries with no access to the real discussions. However, recently in the November and December intergovernmental negotiating body meetings, we were given physical access. So we were allowed to be in the building, and we were allowed to enter the room during the opening and closing plenary. And compared to other processes, this is not ideal. So what we would like to see is we would like to see CSOs playing their full role as observers, ensuring transparency of the process, being able to offer our full expertise. And if we do not have a good understanding of the obstacles that member states are going through, we will not be able to offer expertise. And here, what I also want to point out is it's not only CSOs who are not sufficiently involved in the process. The quadripartite institutions, so UNEP, World Organization for Animal Health, FAO, and the WHO staff who are working on One Health, they have the same access to the negotiations as CSOs. So even the quadripartite institutions who are specialized in giving expertise on One Health, they can potentially participate upon invitation to give expertise, but otherwise they are relevant stakeholders, just like NGOs. And another group of institutions we would like to see in the process who are not being sufficiently involved are ministries specialized in tackling risks, health risks in animals and the environment. Most governments are not involving institutions specialized in protecting animals and the environment in the process. So as long as only a fraction of the stakeholders who know how to just prepare and respond to pandemics is driving the process, and very few who are specialized in prevention are part of the process, we will not have an outcome that is as ambitious and effective as we hope for. You also asked about the role of CSOs in the treaty after it's agreed. And here I have to admit, this is not clear yet. It's still unclear. What we would like to see, though, is in addition to offering expertise and ensuring transparency of the process, CSOs can also support in policy design and implementation on national level to help governments in implementing the obligations that they commit to under the treaty.
You gave a very thorough illustrations of the current situations and possibilities. Thank you, Nina. For the next questions, drawing from your experience and expertise, what measures can we expect the treaty to propose to ensure equity and fairness in pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response across different countries?
Thank you for the question. So first of all, let's define what equity means. Equity means protecting also people who are in the most vulnerable situations. So those individuals, groups, or communities with a disproportionate increased risk of either infection, severity of disease, also mortality. This may include indigenous people, marginalized communities, persons with health conditions, but also people working at the front lines. So people at the human-animal environment interface who come in regular contact with animals and are at risk of infection. Just to mention one example, if we think about COVID-19, COVID-19 also spread in fur farms where workers got infected by mink, and then the virus mutated and also jumped back to the animals. So you can see conditions as they are existing in fur farms, these unhygienic conditions, a lot of animals crammed together, can lead to increased mutation of risk of viruses. Viruses evolve, gain new characteristics, and can infect humans. Equity can only be enabled if these communities, such as the workers in fur farms, which are the first ones to suffer, are protected. So if zoonotic outbreaks are prevented. If a zoonotic spillover has happened, it's too late, and the people at the front lines are already suffering. The One Health approach, as it has been defined by the One Health high-level expert panel and also supported by the World Health Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, FAO, and UNEP, aims at sustainably balancing and optimizing the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. And it offers a comprehensive strategy to address the challenges posed by emerging infectious diseases and is grounded in a set of guiding principles such as equity. So in conclusion, equity can only be enabled if the focus of the pandemic treaty shifts to pandemic prevention via One Health approach. Identifying and tackling hotspots and drivers of outbreaks, phasing out high-risk practices, and supporting communities in transitioning away from such activities, as well as following a precautionary approach.
That was a very in-depth explanations. Thank you, Teresa. Nina, Four Paws has underscored the significance of legal coherence between existing environmental and animal-related treaties in its recommendations to governments for the intergovernmental negotiating bodies. How do you envision the pandemic treaty reinforcing and complementing these existing provisions while aligning with a One Health approach?
Thank you, Gok. And the point about legal coherence is like putting your finger on the wound for some countries. This has been popping up since the beginning of the process because some member states have been saying it's not the WHO's job to protect biodiversity or deal with animals, and that parts of the One Health approach are beyond the WHO mandate. So they should not be part of the process. The challenge is, though, that the WHO and the pandemic treaty are supposed to protect human health. And to do so, member states must require that the treaty coordinates with institutions that are tasked to protect animals and the environment. The risks are clear. The drivers are obvious. Science is telling us the way that we treat animals and the environment is driving health risks in humans. So there is no way out of working with them. And we're not saying that it's the WHO's job to protect animals and the environment. What we are saying is that if the treaty does not set a pathway on how to work with instruments and institutions responsible for protecting animals and the environment in order to protect human health, then the steps that those institutions should be tasked to do to prevent zoonotic disease outbreaks in animals and the environment will not happen. So the treaty has to require that collaboration. And the treaty is the only instrument currently under negotiation that is tasked with preventing pandemics. Also, member states agreed so far, we've been noticing in the legal text, One Health is in the instrument, and there is consensus that One Health should be part of the instrument. So the next step would be for member states to require that the instruments and institutions across the human-animal environment interface with mandates related to protecting animals and the environment work together with the WHO under the treaty. And what we'd like this coordination to tackle is we'd like it to map, firstly, what the science says is necessary to prevent zoonotic disease outbreaks. Secondly, what each institution and instrument is actually doing. Thirdly, the gaps that need to be addressed. And fourth, the recommendations on how to tackle those gaps. So, coordination mechanism to figure out what the gaps are, so that we can develop recommendations to tackle those gaps. One space for the entire pathway to make sure that everything that needs to happen to protect future outbreaks is actually happening.
Thank you, Nina. I would like to follow this up with another question. In your opinion, would extending the CITES mandate to address pandemic risks from wildlife trade in collaborations with the quadripartite be an option to advance the One Health approach, and what are its benefits? Additionally, how does partnering with the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crimes, or UNTOC, aid in combating wildlife trafficking and transnational crime, thereby enhancing pandemic preventions and aligning with existing regulations?
I really love this question because this is where we then go into some details. But before I go into the details, I'm going to give you a short answer and then I'll elaborate. So the short answer is yes. These legal instruments, they would help. But we still need the pandemic treaty to play a big role, because while the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species and the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime can cover part of the challenge within their own remits, it's not their job to protect human health by preventing pandemics. So the key is in coordination and collaboration across instruments to map what the science considers necessary and what each instrument and institution is doing, and the gaps, so that the gaps are addressed. So here again, the WHO Treaty, in our view, is the best space for this mapping, for the gap analysis and recommendations. And then now to the more detailed response on CITES and the UNTOC. On CITES. CITES' role is to ensure international trade in specimens of endangered wild animals and plant species does not threaten their survival. In other words, it focuses on conservation and sustainable use, not on protecting human health from zoonotic risk. This means the species regulated under CITES will be species protected for conservation purposes, and not species that are thought to be a potential source of zoonotic disease. However, while CITES itself may not address pandemic risk, due to its well-established governance and permitting processes, it has the potential to contribute to risk mitigation by employing its principles and mechanisms. So it has a structure in place that we can learn from and use. For instance, it could broaden its scope to identify and manage risks related to wildlife trade, implement stricter surveillance and reporting mechanisms for diseases traded in wildlife, which would allow for early detection, rapid response, or implement stricter regulations, permits. So it's important to note that such measures, though, would only apply to CITES listed species, which constitute a small fraction of the total number of species on Earth, and CITES listed species are listed there for conservation. This is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. It's in the title that the focus is conservation and not zoonotic risk. But we've been asking that question. We've been asking, why wouldn't we expand the mandate of CITES and add species that could pose zoonotic disease risk? And the response we've received is that there is widespread concern that opening CITES for these amendments could open the door to further amendments that could weaken the protection currently given to the listed species. For this reason, the End Wildlife Crime Initiative, which Four Paws is a champion of, is now concentrating their efforts on other avenues. They're working on creating a new global agreement on wildlife crime under the UN Convention on Transnational Organized Crime. So it's called the UNTOC Wildlife Protocol. And they're also working on preventing zoonotic outbreaks by adopting a One Health approach to wildlife trade and markets within the pandemic instrument. You also asked a question about CITES and the quadripartite. A close collaboration between CITES and the quadripartite could significantly advance the One Health approach, because it would foster interdisciplinary coordination, cooperation, information sharing, joint efforts to address zoonotic potential associated within the international trade of CITES-listed species. For example, combining the expertise of CITES and quadripartite could achieve even more comprehensive surveillance and monitoring processes. It could enable information and data sharing between them. It would allow for more accurate understanding of the risks associated with specific species, which would help in the development of targeted strategies for disease prevention and control. So there are benefits. We are strong proponents of a more coordinated approach to fill the gaps for institutions to learn from each other and to make sure that we're as effective as possible. And now on to the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, which is quite an exciting process to look at. The UNTOC is the main instrument relevant in the fight against transnational crime. However, it does not specifically include wildlife trafficking as a clear offense. Nevertheless, the convention indirectly addresses aspects of wildlife trafficking within the broader context of transnational organized crime. And with this comprehensive approach, including the legal framework for addressing transnational organized crime, there is international cooperation, capacity building in place. So it could help create a more robust environment for combating illegal wildlife trade and indirectly also pandemic prevention, indirectly. The End Wildlife Crime Initiative is working on this, as I mentioned, and it was created to address serious gaps in the existing international legal framework for combating wildlife crime and regulating wildlife trade. And as part of its proposed solution to address these gaps, I mentioned the new protocol that they're working on, so on illicit trafficking of wildlife under the UNTOC. And this proposal for this protocol requires that the use of all UNTOC provisions on international cooperation, mutual legal assistance, joint investigations, special investigative techniques, such as controlled deliveries and law enforcement cooperation provisions, that all those tools that are in place under the convention are also used in tackling illicit trafficking of wildlife. So again, it has the mechanics that we can use to tackle this issue that could trigger zoonotic disease risk. On the topic of, so I have to share a little bit more about illicit trafficking in wild fauna and flora, because it is not just about the trade in animals per se. It also brings about negative consequences for the communities involved. It's often fueled by corruption. It deprives governments of revenue. It has devastating impact on wildlife, local communities, national economies, national regional security, and entire ecosystems. So it's much bigger, and it also poses, of course, a risk to public health and animal health. So through this proposal of a protocol, the End Wildlife Crime Initiative is hoping to tackle these risks. And ultimately, we have to say here that the system that we currently have in place on tackling wildlife-related issues is not enough. This is why we are advocating for the creation of this protocol, and it will serve to complement and mutually reinforce other measures taken to prevent future wildlife-related pandemics. And to finish on this question, I have to again repeat that these institutions, these conventions, they have structures in place, and we need to work with them so that we can benefit and learn from them. But we cannot carry on with a siloed approach. All instruments and institutions across the human-animal environment interface, they have a purpose, and if we want them to also prevent future pandemics, we need them to be linked with and coordinate with the WHO within the pandemic treaty.
Thank you, Nina. Your insightful response highlighted the critical role of legal coherence and the One Health approach in the pandemic treaty. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Now, let's turn to Teresa's for our next questions. Teresa's, the call to include the experts and organizations working on animal welfare and environmental protection in the deliberations and negotiations of the International Negotiating Body, or INB, is intriguing. Can you elaborate on why it's essential to involve a diverse range of stakeholders and how their expertise can complement the efforts of those in the health field?
Thanks. You bring up a very important aspect, and that's exactly where we as civil society and also communities should come into play. Involving all relevant stakeholders is what is being meant by so-called whole of society and whole of government approaches. So why should we work across disciplines? We know already that the majority of infectious diseases in humans are of zoonotic, so of animal origin. So tackling these health threats requires a multidisciplinary and collaborative One Health approach involving all relevant stakeholders across the human-animal environment interface. So that means going beyond the WHO, going beyond the human health sector. The current draft already calls for whole of government and whole of society approaches and the creation of national multi-sectoral coordination mechanisms, which are highly welcomed and indeed essential to make sure effective holistic strategies are developed. Member states must make sure that these approaches include also communities who come into direct contact with animals and the environment, as well as civil society organizations, the scientific community, experts involved in human, animal, and environmental health and well-being. And such collaboration would mean that stakeholders from relevant disciplines and communities would work together to identify risk factors and potential drivers of outbreaks and develop practical ways to mitigate risk, prevent spillover, and prioritize high-risk activities and hotspots to effectively and also cost-efficiently address zoonosis. Such collaboration would also mean that we maximize resource utilization in the long term. It would support the implementation of community-centric risk-based solutions and secure increased political commitment and also investment for disease prevention. But it can only be achieved if the pandemic agreement is in place, ensuring that the necessary international, regional, and also bilateral support and resources across nations are provided. The pandemic agreement must be designed to encourage governments to institutionalize a One Health approach to primary prevention with shared competence and accountability between ministries. So relevant ones can be here the ministries of agriculture, environment, trade, health, finance, and also associated focal points for relevant international conventions and agreements, which was just be elaborated on by Nina. And the design and implementation of such national and international One Health strategies can be enabled through the support, expertise, and guidelines of the World Organization for Animal Health, the World Health Organization, FAO, and UNEP.
Thank you, Teresa, for your thoughtful input in the previous response. Let's move forward with the next questions for Nina. Nina, Species 360 is working on creating a central repository of disease species associations for zoonotic pathogens. How can this repository help in the management and prevention of zoonotic disease? And what role does it play alongside CITES and WOA?
Thank you for this question. So unlike current databases, which contain information on outbreak events for a limited number of notifiable diseases, the suggested Species 360 database could contain a searchable list of all known zoonotic disease associations to serve as a resource for enhancing knowledge on specific risks per species. So this a centralized repository that would be regularly updated would allow more sophisticated and complete analyses of disease risk from international wildlife trade in the future. It would be especially helpful to have if high-risk species are identified, because specific measures can then be defined to prevent zoonotic disease spillover. Now, how this repository could be practically used in pandemic prevention is that through coordination with the respective institutions based on the species, it could send information. So if any endangered species are highlighted in the list, they could be given a no trade or limited trade regulation via CITES. And for non-endangered or non-wild animals, that message or trigger can be given by WOA. And in our view, such a coordination mechanism should ideally be linked to the pandemic treaty, and the Species 360 database should then be continuously added to. And so it's a space that would need to keep being fed information into.
Nina, your insights into the role of Species 360 and its potential impact on zoonotic disease management were truly enlightening. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Let's proceed with our next questions for Teresa. So Teresa, we are eager to hear your perspective on the potential economic, environmental, and public health benefits of phasing out fur farming and ending the cross-border transportations of live minks and fur products. How can these measures contribute to pandemic prevention and animal welfare?
Fur farming has strongly declined already, so its economic relevance has reduced significantly. To just mention a few figures, global skin production from major fur species fell drastically from 142 million in 2014 to 34 million in 2022. So leading fashion brands such as Prada, Gucci, Hugo Boss have already ditched real fur, while fake fur at the same time has improved. So this includes also environmental and sustainability aspects by increased use of plant-based fibers and recycled materials. The carbon footprint of alternative materials is also much better than real fur. A lot of fur species, such as American mink or raccoon dogs, are also invasive alien species. So their escape or release in new ecosystems would mean that they have a negative impact on endemic species and biodiversity. Many countries, in particular in Europe, have banned fur farming for ethical and also animal welfare reasons. This process was accelerated by COVID-19 when in Europe alone, more than 20 million mink had to be killed as containment measure to protect humans. So at that time, infections were found in hundreds of fur farms, as well as several reinfections of SARS-CoV-2 from mink to humans. One reason for this spread was or is that the respiratory system of mink, so if you look at the cell level, is quite similar to humans. So these infections pose an incalculable risk that the virus might evolve, mutate, and even be more dangerous for humans. They could also find wild-ranging mink being infected, mink which lived close to such fur farms, so posing also a risk of spillover for wild populations. Another health risk associated with fur farms is avian influenza spreading in mink, foxes, and raccoon dogs in Finnish fur farms, which is happening at the moment. So again, hundreds of thousands of animals are being killed as a containment or response measure. And in this case, also scientists fear that the virus might mutate, may infect other species, and may be better suitable to spread even to humans, which would have disastrous consequences, of course. So to put it in a nutshell, fur farming is an outdated industry with strongly declining acceptance and also economic relevance. It not only poses a serious pandemic risk for human health and animals, but also has negative impacts for the environment, for biodiversity and climate. So governments should actively work towards an end of the fur farming industry, a structured and orchestrated phase-out with alternative income perspectives, which could even be beneficial for farmers. Additionally, to further talk about animal welfare, infections on fur farms are often asymptomatic. So passive surveillance is insufficient and you cannot detect all sick animals. Furthermore, vaccines would even camouflage infections more. Biosecurity measures in fur farms tend to be really costly and involve a lot of veterinary administrative staff, costs of active sampling, as well as commitment of laboratories. So a lot of reasons speak for banning fur farms. Therefore, Four Paws is convinced that pandemic risks related to fur farms, as shown as by the coronavirus and also avian influenza, can only be mitigated by effectively banning this practice. In terms of animal welfare implications, everywhere in the world, animals are being farmed for fur in tiny cage systems that ignore even basic biological needs of the animals being kept. Often 10,000s of animals are being kept in close proximity to each other. This type of keeping goes also hand in hand with severe animal welfare problems such as chronic stress, compromised immune response, massive behavioral disorders, so cannibalism, for example, or self-mutilations, regular injuries, infections. So it's clear that ending this cruel practice in itself would contribute to animal welfare. contribute to improving animal welfare. With you on pandemics, it would ensure that no more affected animals need to suffer from symptoms are being eradicated.
Teresa, thank you for your insights in the previous response. Let's dive deeper into Four Paws recommendations for our legally binding obligations to phase out fur farming. Can you share your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities that such a phase out might present and how it can be carried out effectively and ethically? What steps should we anticipate in the future to turn these recommendations into a reality?
So, one main challenge is for sure a clear commitment of major production countries. So in this context, we can mention Russia and China. On the other hand, there is a dynamic political debate about phasing out fur farming for different reasons, mainly animal welfare risks, but also health risks in the European Union and in North America, as well as ongoing initiative to ban the import and sales of fur products in Switzerland, in UK and the EU. The successful 2023 European Citizens Initiative has shown that there is strong support of citizens, member states, and also economic stakeholders to end fur farming in Europe. And the next years will show if this will result in the political action needed. If successful, such initiatives will significantly reduce the market for fur products and can pay for progress on a global level. To get accepted and be sustainable, initiatives need to take into account the remaining people working on fur farms and develop or offer alternative income sources.
Thank you, Teresa. Your insights have been very enlightening. Shifting our focus to another critical issues, we've seen multiple outbreaks of rabies linked to the dog and cat meat trade. Can you shed light on how the indiscriminate catching of dogs, regardless of their rabies vaccination status, impacts rabies control efforts and public health in affected regions?
Thank you for this question. The trade in dogs and cats for human consumption is not compatible with rabies elimination strategies. It undermines plans to eliminate rabies deaths because the key objective of a successful canine rabies elimination program is to maintain a high enough level of rabies vaccination coverage to interrupt rabies transmission within a dog population. So it's important to vaccinate at least 70% of dogs to eliminate rabies. But the dog and cat meat trade is directly responsible for removing millions of dogs from populations, including also a lot of vaccinated animals. So the removal of vaccinated dogs effectively reduces the immunity of the entire population and increases dog population turnover, which in turn decreases the efficacy of rabies vaccination programs. Additionally, the lack of control over dog movement has been blamed for disease spread. Research has demonstrated that it only takes a small number of dogs, so just a few dogs, to introduce disease to a native population. Just to mention one example, if we have a look at Flores, which is a previously rabies-free Indonesian island, following the introduction of just 3 dogs from rabies endemic Sulawesi in 1977, this resulted in an outbreak leading to at least 113 human deaths related to the introduction of these dogs to Flores. Other public health issues which are related to the dog and cat meat trade, there is the potential for other diseases and infections beside rabies to be spread through dog and cat meat, including, for example, cholera. Consuming dog and cat meat can also place the consumer at risk of E. coli and salmonella. In addition, poisons used to facilitate the capture of dogs and cats stolen from the steeds can pose a potential public health risk. Recognizing the negative impact of the dog and cat meat trade, and ever-growing number of countries and localities have explicitly banned the slaughter and sale of dogs and cats for food, while others have adopted various approaches on grounds of animal welfare, public health and safety, and disease control and eradication. So such models should be used as examples to other countries engaging in the dog and cat meat trade to demonstrate the variety of routes that can be taken to end the trade. For example, it just popped up in news. South Korea will introduce a ban to prohibit the breeding and sale of dogs for consumption, which is great news for the around 1 million dogs involved in the trade annually there. Those involved in the trade, including farmers, slaughterers, and restaurant owners, will need to submit phase-out plans to local authorities. They will be offered support to move away from the industry and find new sources of sustainable income. And the law is expected to come into full effect by 2027 to allow a 3-year period for the industry to shut down the operations completely. Four Paws follows different approaches to end the dog and cat meat trade. So, for example, Four Paws does a lot of political lobbying engagement in Indonesia, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and also on international level. We are aiming at increasing public awareness, also on national and international level. We are engaging with international and national public health and veterinary agencies to highlight the public health risks related to the dog and cat meat trade. We are supporting local organizations that are working on ending the dog and cat meat trade. We are also working with the tourism industry to demonstrate and highlight risks that the dog and cat meat trade pose to travelers and also the communities.
Thank you, Teresa, for your answers. Nina, I would like to ask you the next questions. From your point of view, what are the key legal and policy changes needed at the national level to support the treaty's objectives?
That's a good question. And so picking up from what Teresa was mentioning, there are, of course, measures that need to be taken that would differ from country to country. If we look at what the treaty objectives would be and the changes that governments would need to do on the national level, and we just focus on the legal changes tied to prevention and One Health. The main change that member states will need to do, if they have not done it yet, is set up a One Health governance structure. This would be one step that all member states need to do. And that would include, for example, a responsible committee, like a national steering committee, for the participatory development of One Health strategies. Such a committee would recommend to be directly under the President's or Prime Minister's office at the highest possible level, rather than specifically under the Ministry of Health. Member states would also need to set up interministerial coordination to meet that purpose. So you'd have a steering committee, but you'd have also the ministries coordinating with each other to facilitate information exchange and implement One Health strategies. The One Health strategy will be developed with the support of this national steering committee and a whole of government, whole of society approach. It would depend on the national high-risk practices, on the hotspots and activities that could drive zoonotic risks. So each country would have its own priorities. And this change would be minor, but it would make a big difference, because then you'd have all these institutions developing a strategy together, which would be more coherent. You'd have the stakeholders who are affected by zoonotic disease risks involved in designing these solutions. And then based on all of this, each member state would then design their legal and policy changes. When developing those policies, it would be very important that governments work with the communities that come into daily contact with animals and the environment, so that the transition away from high-risk practices is designed with the affected communities. We've seen so many cases where governments would just set up bans, they put bans in place, but then the same practice would continue happening, only illegally, because communities are relying on these practices for their survival, for their livelihoods. So we cannot do set up single-sided policies. So when communities and relevant ministries are involved in the solution, it increases the chances that the policies that are designed are owned by the stakeholders who implement them. So the one big thing that we would like to see, and it's not really that big, is for governments to set up interministerial coordination, national steering committee to develop their strategy, and moving from there, they would then develop national policies. In the treaty, we would think it would be helpful for there to be a list of high-risk practices that governments need to pay attention to reduce zoonotic risk, but each government is going to have its own strategy based on its own national situation, and the bans that they would put in place or the transitions they would design would have to be situation specific.
That was a very comprehensive explanation, Nina. Thank you for sharing your expertise and thoughts throughout our discussions. Now, let's turn our attentions to our final questions for Teresa. As we wrap up our conversations, we'd like to know how can organizations around the world, especially in Asia, contribute to the successful negotiations of the pandemic treaty to ensure the best outcome for the prevention of zoonotic spillovers from the source?
Thank you for this question. It's a pity that we are already at the end of the episode. I would love to continue this conversation for a few more hours, but I understand we need to come to an end. So coming to your question, what can organizations worldwide do to influence the negotiations of the pandemic treaty? So the pandemic treaty negotiations are one important step towards this new understanding of health, which is built on improving our relationship with animals and nature. The harmonization of law and the development of national One Health plans is the other key step. In order to influence the negotiations before the May 2024 deadline, which is pretty soon, we need to be effective and act quickly. So first of all, you need to build up and strengthen relationship with your government, your permanent representation in Geneva, where the health negotiations around the pandemic treaty take place, and international institutions such as the World Health Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, FAO, and UNEP. It's very helpful to identify and win stakeholders to which your targets listen to find out who advises your targets and influence them. When engaging with and lobbying governments, the key message is we need a shift towards pandemic prevention via One Health approach. So effective pandemic prevention via One Health approach does not only save millions of lives, it's also the most cost-effective strategy to tackling pandemics. By protecting animals and nature, we can save our future. So the message needs to be very strong and clear. When they suffer, we suffer. When we expect member states to work across silos, we also need to follow this approach ourselves. So there are several networks you can join, which are working on how to prevent pandemics. Four Paws and the Pandemics and Animal Welfare Network is one of them. Four Paws collaborates with 20 to 30 organizations across disciplines and has access to experts and scientists worldwide. We would love to welcome you in our group because collaborating with allies and partners gives additional weight to our asks. Additionally, you can also be officially involved in the INB, so the negotiating process. You can share statements, you can do interventions if you become either an NXE stakeholder or if you are in official relation with the WHO. If you are not yet an NXE stakeholder and you want to become one, you can simply reach out to your government, asking them to propose you as relevant stakeholder. You need to fill out a short form, and then they can suggest you as relevant stakeholder in the next negotiating meeting. But as far as I know, all relevant stakeholders have been accepted so far. So the chances are high to become an NXE stakeholder. Additionally, member states need to design and develop One Health strategies and plans on national level. Your role can be advising them and ensuring that these plans lead to improvements for animals, so protecting also human health.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on what we can do. That was very helpful for our audience. As we reach the end of today's episodes, I want to extend my gratitude to Nina and Teresa for their invaluable insights today. Thank you so much. Your perspectives on the pandemic treaty have provided us with a deeper understanding of the intricate relationships between animal welfare and global health.
Thank you, Gökhan. It was really great to be here and to speak to you on behalf of Asia for Animals Coalition.
Thank you very much. Also from my side, it was a pleasure talking to you and happy to continue this conversation soon.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. This conversation underscores the significance of the pandemic treaty as a critical milestone in our collective efforts to foster a healthier, more sustainable world for both humans and animals. For those interested in learning more about the work of Four Paws International and their initiatives in animal welfare and pandemic preventions, please visit their website at www.4-paws.org. Stay tuned for more episodes where we explore the intersection of animal welfare, environmental sustainability, and public health. Until next time, stay engaged, stay informed, and continue to be a voice for the voiceless. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find everything you need to know about our work and connect with us at asiaforanimals.com. Tune in for the next episode. Asia for Animals Coalition, a united voice for Asia's animals.